There's no manual to trauma. There's no manual to negative things that occur. There's really just how you deal with those things and process those things and how you choose to move forward because it is choice.
Welcome to Women's Thrive Podcast. This is where you'll get to hear incredible stories of female entrepreneurs, business owners, women from all walks of life. Myself, Raymond Jan, and my co-host Abigail will be interviewing incredible women, hearing inspiring stories of women from all around the world. I have no doubt that you will find something that will be life-changing for you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us for our future episodes. Hello and welcome to today's podcast episode with one of our incredible guests. My name is Ramonda Jan and I will be your host for this podcast episode. We're embarking on a brand new, amazing series featuring some of our authors from the Women Thrive book. And today you get to meet our wonderful Shameria Ann Davis, who I'm very excited to introduce to you. Hi, how are you doing, Shameria?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in the beautiful rainy slash sunny Seattle and
Oh,
Washington.
Seattle, good. All right. Well, I hope that you, my listeners today, are going to stick around for today's episode as we're talking about healing through words and the journey of perspective and resilience. And Shameria certainly has an incredible and truly inspirational story to share with you. But today, before we begin, I want to introduce you our amazing speaker. So, Shameria Ann Davis is a business coach focused on helping CEOs and business owners get really clear on their business strategy, branding, and their winning business model. Having spent the last 2 decades in health and wellness, life and business coaching, Shumeria is highly experienced in supporting her clients in finding the answers they're looking for. In the Women Thrive book, Shameria opens up about her journey through military trauma, domestic violence, and abuse that helped her actually find her strength, her courage, and determination to thrive in business and life. And today, Shameria is a mom of 2 beautiful boys and is in a healthy relationship. And above all, she's happy, trauma free. Shameria, welcome to the podcast episode.
Thank you. Happy to be here and share some of my story.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful story, and I know people who will get to read your story in the book is probably going to be really impacted and moved, especially if someone who does share some of the years in the military. Now you're retired. Tell me a little bit more about just that path that you have traveled in your life.
The military is an interesting terrain for a female, especially. It is with a lot of changes to the way that we just see and do life in general. And through that journey, I find that there are a lot of things that I now react totally different than maybe I would have had I not been in the military. And I know that venturing through friendships with females and in relationships and how I just process information. So it was quite the journey. I started off at the age of 17 in the military. So very young. I really learned how to live through the military. And that was really the lens that I do life through, which is a very structured environment, as you would imagine. And I finished college and went from what they call enlisted over to what they call an officer. And so we call it the dark side because you kind of change paths as an enlisted person. You're doing more of the worker bee jobs. And then as you go over into the officer ranks, you're doing more of the leadership and the strategy and the designs for how we do things, which is a lot of weight to carry because you're responsible for everything. So it was quite the journey, but I definitely loved it. And I'd probably do it again if I had to do life all over again.
Wow. And what's it like being a woman in the military? I mean, I can't quite imagine the environment that you're, especially at 17 years old, getting dropped into.
Yes. Yes. It's always fun when men have a harder time doing things than you, and it's a breeze for you, especially me because I'm 5'2", I'm short and very small. So being able to do things that the guys are doing and then do it better than them too was always really, really fun. It teaches you how much strength a woman has in comparison to how we're often perceived or portrayed in life. And we're often considered damsels in distress. I'm like, I'm no damsel in distress whatsoever. And it just gives you empowerment to know that there's really nothing you can't do.
Wow. And you so courageously spent the last few months really writing about your experiences in military and beyond it. Quite a few traumatic things that has happened to you. What gave you courage to actually start speaking about this part of your life and your experiences?
Once I retired, I started doing some intense therapy. I noticed that I was really living in a posture of what they call hyper-vigilance, where you're always on alert and you're always anxious about the next thing that's going to happen and really, really, really protective about pretty much everything. Like I'd be worried about things like my kids going swimming and drowning, even though no one's ever drowned. In relationships, I'd have walls up or have my guard up. And so as I went through therapy, she began to ask me a series of questions that really triggered some memories that I had suppressed. And once I realized that I was suppressing what happened to me in the military at a very young age, I was 21, it kind of came flooding back with some memories. And I decided at that moment that I really should address it because it was the reason all this hypervigilance really started to push itself to the forefront. And I didn't recognize it as that. She did, but I did not. And so I really started to unpeel layers one by one. And I had already been writing a book of poetry that I've written my entire life. I've been writing poetry since I was a kiddo. And I decided to publish that. But along the journey, I thought I should probably write about this thing that is overshadowing everything else. And so it kind of, I don't really know how I found Women Thrive or Women Thrive found me, but it was the perfect opportunity for me to really share that story. So I just felt like I was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. What I always say that as women, we become empowered when we share our truth, when we own our
Mhm.
truth and be able to step into our truth and do it so unapologetically. And you really dive quite deep into some of the stories and incidents that happened to you through this book. And did you find any of
Mhm.
it really difficult to write? And what's your intention? What do you hope that when people read that, what would you like the audience to feel, experience, or perhaps take away from your story?
Difficult is an understatement. Writing this has really it pushed me into a different level of therapy, honestly. And I started cognitive processing therapy because writing, it was really hard to channel my emotions as a very strong, level headed person. I teach other people how to handle their lives, which along the way, I kind of put mine to the side. And it made me understand that I need to dig deep into mine as well and kind of go a step further. So trauma wasn't holding me back, but some thought patterns remained. And writing, it was really hard to channel my emotional output. Like, okay, you went through this thing, but how did it make you feel in the moment that you were writing? And so I really had to stop and refocus myself many, many times. And it took me a while. I would write and rewrite and write and rewrite because I wanted to think, how do I want to get this message across? And I want to put my emotional input in there, but how do I also channel it in the way that I can reach others so that when they are experiencing the same thing, that they kind of have a guide of how to process for themselves? Because I've read many of traumatic stories of other women, but it didn't give me any insight into how I would talk about my own story. And I want my story to be able to do that for others, reading it to help them process what I wasn't processing myself when I first started writing.
Oh, wow. What do you hope that when women read it, they'll be able to walk away with?
I give a few pointers in the book, so you gotta go read it. but I give a few pointers on how to start with your trauma. So, where you start in recognizing that you've been affected and how you let that shape what's happening next. How do you empower yourself? And I give steps in the book, but essentially, I want people to take the time to dig deep and figure out what it is that happened to you, how it's making you feel, and how you walk away from those feelings and remain intact when you do it. How do you persevere through the pain? Because it is going to be there for a while. And as you dig into trauma, some of it reignites. So it'll be a whole new fire that you need to put out as you're addressing it. But you don't let that fire burn you in that moment. You figure out how to blow it out and keep going. And little fires will pop up here and there, and you need to figure out how to blow them out and keep going.
It's ultimately also having tools, and you mentioned that you've been through some various therapy. What has
Mhm.
helped you work through the various traumas that you've experienced in your life, and what has been some of the most effective?
So trauma is a tricky thing. Every person is very, very different. Some people need to dig into the details and kind of exposure to the details one by one and kind of reigniting that exposure because it'll rile up some anxiety in you. I found that that is not great for me. I don't really like to dig into the details a lot. It's the themes that I like to dig into. So, what has it shaped in me? So, I talk about hypervigilance a lot, thinking about the ways that trauma has affected me and how it has put blinders up for things that I just didn't experience. My therapist has asked me the question before, if something happens to me and I don't want it to ever happen again, I will create a whole plan for that to never happen again. And in doing that, I might negate some experiences that haven't happened yet that are good. But I think about all the bad things that could happen if I let this thing happen again. And so I've had to find a way to not do that and pause for a second and say, okay, I don't want these bad things to happen, but I do want some of these good things to happen. For example, if somebody frustrates me and I don't like conflict very much, if someone frustrates me, I'll say, I'm not going to have this conversation like this with that person again. But if I don't ever have that conversation like that with that person again, there may be some details about that person or ways about that person that may be close to me that may be beneficial for me to learn without a hard conversation. How do I learn it? Well, that's the good part of it. The bad part is I have to suck through the hard parts of the conversation. So I've learned to stop trying to close off walls and open them up so I don't shut down some things that will be beneficial later on. So
Mm.
it's helped me kind of walk through that process and not do that.
Yeah. And do you find that healing is like an ever evolving journey, or do we ever stop healing? Do we, once you've been through trauma, or is it managing? What do you think from your experience? What could you share with someone who has been through trauma and perhaps, yeah, still navigating it?
It is a beautiful, jagged journey. I don't think healing ever stops. I think you open up pathways to new healing because trauma has to be torn down piece by piece and layer by layer. And as you tear down a layer, you'll learn something new in that process. And you may also discover something else you need to heal from that may not necessarily be trauma, but something trauma left behind. So it's almost like when you peel a mango, for example, mangoes have so many strings in them and so much before you can get to the seed. And there's a different 5 different ways that you can cut a mango open and spin it and open it up so you can get down to the seed. But then when you get down to the seed is covered in this like hairy residue. You got to break that thing open and you actually get to the seed. Trauma is kind of like that. And in order to get all the way down to the bottom where you replant that seed to grow something beautiful, you have to peel all of that junk away. And that is done in steps.
Mm. Oh, I love the way you describe it. It's just, it really is a process, isn't it? And there are so many different healing methods, and the way trauma really affects us can be in so many unexpected ways that you're not even aware of. And I remember when I was going through my own trauma and I lost pretty much my identity, my confidence, my voice through my trauma. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't know this was my trauma response that I was going
Mhm.
through. And it's so hard to understand when you don't know, when you don't have that awareness, what's the
Mhm.
direction someone needs to go. So if someone has read your chapter, read your story, and some of the stories, or would you like to share any part of your story to kind of let some insight into our audience? And then if someone resonates, how do they go about?
There's a part in my story that I talk about a relationship that I started very young. I was a freshman in high school with this relationship. The relationship didn't last very long, but it was the tiny things that would happen in that relationship, the things he would say and the things he would do, which when you think back on it, it's not normal behavior for a 14-year-old boy to be abusive. It's not normal. So it was not like me at a 14 years old could pick out the things that were happening and say, this doesn't make any sense. It didn't feel good as a kiddo, but you don't think danger when your 14-year-old boyfriend is doing certain things. But the blessing for me was that my mother, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because she's been through domestic violence and she's watched her mother go through domestic violence. And when you have that sort of recurring theme in your actual family dynamics, you can save the next generation because you've experienced some things. So she was able to give me insight into some of the things that were happening so that I would know that they weren't what needed to be happening and what I was experiencing was not okay and that I was taking it too lightly. And it's not something that I recognize, but I didn't tell her right away. So if you read the story, you'll notice I don't tell her right away what's happening. She kind of sees on her own and she starts to pick up on things. It's kind of like watching a movie when you read the way I wrote it, but it's like watching a movie and everybody else is watching a movie and they're like, this is not okay. What's happening? And it's like they see danger around the corner and they're trying to yell at the screen, it's in the next room, like it's coming. But I couldn't figure that out myself because I was a kid. So that it kind of followed in a way that I didn't expect it to follow. So that along with all the other things I talk about in the trauma in the military, it leaves behind thought processes about yourself. Like what is wrong with me? Like why don't I notice these things? Or what did I do to cause these things? And really it's not that you did anything right or wrong. It's just life. So if someone finds themselves in that situation and they've had repetitive trauma, which is the theme of my story, well, I'd like to leave them with there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And it's not that you've done anything right or wrong. There's no manual to life. There's no manual to trauma. There's no manual to negative things that occur. There's really just how you deal with those things and process those things and how you choose to move forward because it is choice. And anything terrible can happen to anyone. It's what you do with it that'll shape your tomorrow. It's not what's happening to you today that shapes your tomorrow. It's what you do with it.
Mm. Do you find that you realized you were going through trauma, or was it post fact that when you
Post,
reflect and then
post, post for sure. It's funny because you mentioned and asked about healing and it being a process. When I went through the therapy and the memories flooded me for the one trauma that I suppressed for a period of time. It made me look back. So those questions came. It made me look back. I had been through all those things, but I had not seen them together myself. I hadn't done that. That happened recently. And I asked myself, how did you get here? And how did you let all these things happen? But it's a blaming game when you get into the world of hypervigilance. You will point the finger at yourself and you will ask yourself questions that you never asked yourself before. And it's almost like an overshadowing of guilt. But you turn around and blame yourself for that instead of processing the guilt that you feel about what happened. and the negativity about what happened. So I didn't. It's funny. I'm in my head. I'm like, it's like watching a movie. Maybe I should have figured it out sooner, but I didn't.
Yeah.
It was a look back.
And before we got on, you mentioned that in a way, this was what helped you build your strength, your courage, your resilience is because of those experiences. It's almost who you are today. Do you find that it
Mhm.
was somewhat blessing in disguise, even though there were unpleasant and traumatic experiences that happened to you?
For sure. I always tell people perseverance is one of those things trauma left behind, one of the positive things that left behind. As each thing happens to me in life, trauma or not, if it's negative, if you tell me you're never going to achieve X, Y, and Z, I'm going to achieve X, Y, and Z just to spite you because don't tell me what I can't do.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way. Trauma has done that with me. It's like, this is not going to define me. And I'm rebellious to it.
Yeah. I
It's
love
really been the pillar of my strength, really.
it. Oh my goodness, Shameria, I'm really excited about your story coming out because I know, especially for women who perhaps not seeing the signs or have been through experience and they don't know how to start asking for help, or even maybe there will be memories that come back up for you as well after you read some of the stories in this book. Yeah, I think it's going to be truly transformative. And I just want to say congratulations and thank you for
I
trusting the process and going as deep as you did with your story.
Thank you. It was quite the process. I would applaud the entire team involved because I feel like mine was a lot of work and not just for me, but for the people helping me to shape it. So I appreciate everything that everyone has done to get me to the place where I could share from a good place and give it a good message so that the readers can be left with something that really helps them transform whatever trauma they've been through.
Yeah, no, it's so beautifully presented. And when I was reading, I was like, I just want to keep reading because it's like you said, like watching a movie and you kind of see what's coming, but you gotta get there and you gotta see
Yeah.
what's coming and what happened there. So, and as I said, there were also some really beautiful practical learnings in your story, which I personally really loved. There's something that stood out about your chapter out of other chapters that you've included some of your poetry.
Yes.
Tell me a bit more about that.
I found the love of poetry my freshman year of high school, of all places, which is interesting now that I think about my story. But my English teacher in high school was a poet and she loved poetry. She was a very eclectic person. She would wear, when we think about the hippies in the United States and the bell bottom, she was one of those kind of people, but she was amazing. But she saw sparks in me with a lot of things that I didn't really see in myself. And she pushed me. She would say, "You are too smart to be in my class." She was a regular English teacher. She's like, "You're going to take a test because you need to be in honors classes moving forward." And I'm like, "What? I don't want to be in honors classes." So she would read poetry and teach us how to write it. And so through that, I actually published poetry in high school. There was a book that we put out in high school. And so I did do it through that process. And I just been writing ever since. And anytime I'm having a hard time with anything, I write. If I am struggling with my emotional output for something, I write. If it's a rough day and someone makes me angry, I write. I'm more of an introvert. You wouldn't know it, but I'm more of an introvert. So I don't share a lot with people. So I'm an internal processor. And so poetry is my way to do that. And so I've been writing and I turned it into music. So I do sing and have released music that poetry spun into songs. And it's just a love for me. Poetry is a love for me.
I love it. And those poem that you've written triggered. Tell me how
Mhm.
this poem came about and you kind of refer back throughout your chapter.
Yes. So during the process of writing this book in particular, I mentioned how hard it was. to channel some of my emotions. And we have our calls together as a group that's writing. And through that, it really made me have to sit with some of my emotions about these things and how long it took me to recognize. And it's almost like vivid memories just come to the forefront and things you haven't thought about until you start writing. It's simple when you go through trauma, but it's so layered that you don't always think about how it's affecting you in the moment.
Mm.
And as we would sit on these calls and we would talk, and I would then spend the week processing what I've written and what's happened, it really pushed me to write. I needed to express how I was feeling about the book itself. So the poem is new. It was written in the process of writing the book.
Well, that's why it made it in there. And tell me more about the poem. You called it Triggered.
Uh-huh.
Why was it named Triggered? Tell me more. 'Cause I kept reading it. I was like, I need to know more about this poem and just what was happening as you were writing it.
As we were writing each week, I was putting my emotions into, but not enough. I was putting my responses into, but not enough. And it just there was an overwhelming theme of you're not giving enough to this project. You need to be more open, more open, more open, more open. Well, that was triggering me. It was frustrating me in the biggest of ways. And it was making it really hard to share because when I'm triggered, I shut down. I don't open up, but I had to. And so I really had to force myself to do it. And it was triggering every single time I had to open up more. And I didn't want to, but I needed to. And so that's where it came from.
What do you think Poe's doing? I mean, I don't know, why do we subject ourselves to a process like this? Surely there must be something good in it.
Yes, there's healing in it because I can tell you the place that I was when we first started writing to the place that I am now is night and day. My boyfriend would probably tell you the same thing about our relationship. The process has made me a little more open and a little more willing to dig deeper than I was digging before with a lot of things. And being a hyper vigilant person, you want to not give so much because I won't have to blame myself later if I give so much now and then it was in vain kind of thing. And so it's a negative thing, but it's something that trauma leaves behind. And even when you start to heal, you still have a little bit of it left behind. It doesn't just go away. I think that it's a healing process to do this.
Feel like after trauma, what it teaches us is a new layers of protection mechanism.
Hmm.
And once our brain has learned that this is not safe, it's not good, it just keeps trying to protect us in various ways that we may not even be aware. I've had
Hmm.
experiences, obviously far from what your life experiences were, but experiences where the trauma was doing that to protect me. And I wasn't even aware
Hmm.
of it. And
Right.
similarly, when I get triggered, I want to go shut down. And when I get upset, I don't want to confront. And sometimes I don't
Yes.
speak. And my partner just goes insane. He's like, I'll let you do what you need to do. When you're ready, you'll come talk to me. But I know what's
Yeah.
going on in your head. And I know you're
Yeah.
struggling. But it's like, I would refuse to face conflict. And that's my
Yes.
way of protecting myself.
Same here. It is a overwhelming thing that I do. It's uncontrollable. My brain does it, and I just have to reel myself out of it. But it is not instantaneous. It is. It takes time. It might take me a day. It might take me a couple hours. Depends on what it was.
Yeah. How do you hope that now that your story is out there in the world for anyone to see, how do you hope that this will impact people who get to read it?
Really, I wanted to inspire. That's really what I wanted to do. There are a lot of women with untold stories, and
Mm.
there are a lot of women with told stories, and you can tell a story a million times, but until you dig deep enough to really start to pull out how it's affecting you, there's still some healing to be done. And through it, I hope that people recognize what they may need to do to get to healing because they may read it and recognize, I thought I was good, but I'm not because I'm reading this and I'm not. So I really hope it inspires people to push.
I agree. And even in this process, actually, one of the ladies who were working on the editing team, one of the stories really triggered her. And she was like, wow, I didn't realize that something like that would trigger me so deeply and how she felt about it. So it's interesting that some things can still trigger us and bring it to life. And I really, really appreciate you putting in that extra vulnerability into this process because I think it's so required in order for us to genuinely open up about life experiences that it might be really hard. You said it. It's not an easy thing to go back and recite the stuff that happened to us and process it in a way that is helpful for the reader. But I certainly know it was not done in vain. I know it's going to be having wonderful, wonderful feedback and response
Mhm.
after the book has been published. Your story is phenomenal. I'm really grateful and I'm glad that you've included your art, which is your poetry, into it because it really brings it to life and it kind of gives us a peek into your mind, into your emotions, even deeper beyond the story. Because I feel
Mhm.
like the poetry was kind of gluing up together with the emotions that were going on inside of you at the same time.
It was raw. It was very raw poetry. When I'm frustrated, I'm not the greatest with spoken word, but I am with written word. Some people can process through writing. Some people process through speaking. I'm not a process through speaking kind of person. I have to put it on paper.
So you asking some questions in your poetry as well that how did it happen? Why did it happen to me? Was I bearing it for so long? And it's almost like same questions. I think if anybody reads your chapter and they'll read the poetry, is going to be that the inquiry into your brain because your own brain will say those things to you. Was it
Mhm.
me? Am I
Yeah.
going insane? Or are these real memories flashing back? Because a lot of times when you've been through trauma, you don't know whether
Mhm.
these things are real or is it my brain tricking me as well at the same time? So it's really fluid process when you're trying to work through trauma and go backwards into life experiences that created something like this.
Right.
Shumeria, beyond the book, of course, you mentioned that you're going to be publishing your next poetry book, which I'm very excited. Tell us a little bit more. I know this is your life work.
Yes. So that book will come out shortly after this book is released in the summer. I'm really excited about it. It has about 30 different poems that I selected that were my most memorable. Some of them written when I was like 13 years old, which is impressive to me now. I'm like, what? My brain was doing this at 13. but so it'll come out in the summer. It's called Divinity on Our Lives, Poems for Every Day. And I'm excited about it.
Oh, congratulations. I'm really thrilled for you. So if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, connect with you, what would be the best ways to do that?
The best way would be my website, which is www.shameriaann, spelled SHAMeriaANN.com. And it links to all of my social media and my LinkedIn, and it tells you everything that you need to know, and anything that is available will be on that website.
Oh, well, amazing. So make sure that if you want to connect with Shameria, check out the show notes below. And as we're recording this episode, there's another milestone that you reached. You just got into a new decade of your life. So happy
I
birthday
think
to you.
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm 40. I can finally say I'm 40. I'm not young, but I am young.
You're young and wonderful and truly inspirational. Honestly, I hope that people who get to read your story I get to also connect with you. So for those of you who've been hearing us talking about the Women Thrive book, if you're not aware yet, we published the Women Thrive book series, which is inspirational, true stories of women who have overcome adversity. So you can head over to Amazon and grab yourself a copy of this book. It's a volume 3 Women Thrive book, which has Shameria Ann Davis featured in this book along with her poems. So if you hopefully watching this or listening to this after June the 20th in 2024, the book would have been already published, and it has a blue, beautiful outline line art on the cover. So look out for the blue line art on the cover. I'm really thrilled. This is our 3rd publication, and I think this book is probably the best one yet, to be honest. And yeah, I think it's going to be truly transformational for a lot of people.
Agree. Some amazing stories. So I can't wait for it to be released.
Yeah. What's next after your authorship journey? Is there anything exciting that's, I don't know, you have on your roadmap? Anything that you'd want to share with our audience that you're excited about?
I am a public speaker, and so I'm really excited about applying for the TED Talk series. And so that is my next pathway, is putting that journey forward. I've been working on it for a while, but I'm excited to actually submit. That's the part that makes you nervous.
Yeah, no, for sure. Putting yourself out there, why not? I mean, you got a powerful story, and I think your mission as well, and helping other people overcome their traumas. What would you say is like why you do what you do every day? What makes you want to get out of bed and help people?
Really helping people makes me want to get out of bed and help people.
Mm.
There are so many people that need a pathway forward. They need support and guidance. Resiliency looks different on every person, but some people are not driven individually. They need external to help them push forward. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about. So really helping people helps me help people.
Yeah, for sure. And you do both. I mean, you've spent a decade doing life coaching, 2 decades doing health and wellness coaching, and now also business coaching. So you're quite well equipped in such a diverse range of topics to support people. Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for spending the time with us to hear this episode from Shumeria. Super excited for you to grab the latest copy of the book. Make sure you follow the links in the show notes to connect to Shumeria and drop her a message. Let her know if you have watched or listened to this episode and how you have been perhaps inspired, motivated, or impacted by what we shared today. And remember, trauma is only just a journey. It's not going to define you. Shmira, any last parting thoughts?
Of course, to tell them to go read the book. Go read the book.
I love it. Of course. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at another episode. Take care for now. Bye bye. Thank you for tuning in to Women Thrive podcast. If you found today's episode empowering and inspiring, be sure to subscribe and follow us. Better yet, leave a review and share it with others. We're committed to bringing you more stories that will empower and inspire you on your own journey. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep pursuing your dreams.